Since this is a meeting with all commissioners, we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, this morning, we have the staff from the EQB to come, and they're actually gathering input. So they're going to give us a presentation, and then they're going to allow the staff and commissioners to ask questions. Even though you're not giving us technical advice, you're gathering information, which Eric explained. And then if there's anybody later that wants to comment, they'll welcome any comments. So I'll turn it over to Eric Dahl and Heather to do the presentation. And
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. Thank you for citizens for coming in the middle of the day. I know that's not always convenient for people's work schedules. And, as you mentioned, we're out. We planned this meetings with LGUs about a month ago, and most of it is to touch base and give a status update about where we are with various silica sand legislation, as well as to get input to our rulemaking. And I'll let Eric talk a little bit more about that. We're really happy to be here, and so far we've met with Winona, the city of Winona, the county of Winona, and Nicollet County, as well as Seward County, and we're scheduling more interviews with LGUs. And I know today it's a little bit broader than what we've done with them. It's been more staff to staff, but we're open to any way that the county wants to hold these meetings. And so I know that there are lots of questions, and I'll be able to technically I helped write parts of the documents. I'll be able to answer some of these questions today. Some of them I might not be able to answer. I just don't have the technical background, but I will get you or give you names of people or facilitate you maybe getting those answers. And then some questions might be just so broad that it might need, and as a resource, the Silica Sand Technical Advisory Team, which is available to LGUs if they want to tap it, and to encourage that, because right now there's no one in the queue. And so I'll talk a little bit more about how to tap the Silica Sand Technical Advisory Team. And so just a broad overview of what the Silica Sand legislation brought and what has been completed. You're aware that Cure has been using the toolkit document. And so that was completed in the October or March 19th. The technical assistance team is completed, and just to give you a little bit of background, there's not just a static team member. People are interested in who's the expertise. And really it will depend on the question that comes into the technical assistance team. So the team will be constructed as needed for the individual question or the individual client. And then there's an ordinance library, and that's completed, but it could be improved upon. So that's why I put evolving. And that is a resource for people who are developing ordinances to see who else has developed ordinance and the type of language that they put to address issues related to silica sand. The DNR had two mandates, one to create a trout stream setback permit, and that was constructed, and then to develop rules for the reclamation of silica sand. The EQB is looking at environmental review thresholds and developing rules for that. MPCA, the Minnesota Pollution Control, is looking at particulate emissions and developing thresholds for that related to silica sand. And I said Eric will talk a little bit more about that in detail. And then finally, the Minnesota Department of Health was asked to develop a health-based value for air quality for ambient silica, and that has been completed. Right now, the only thing that remains, in progress is rulemaking. We understand that there are a lot of public concerns about silica sand mining, and that's what the various silica sand package is meant to address. Ultimately, what we want and what at the state level is to give you any technical expertise that we have at the state level and to make that easily available to LGUs to access. And that's why partially we're here, is to let you know that there's assistance available if you need it. As you know, the toolkit, it was done partially in consultation with local units of government for different geographic areas of the state. And here are some of the issues that we addressed in the document. And just to be forthright, I know that there's disappointment that ban language wasn't included in the document. We really, one of the issues that we've dealt with is that it wasn't really, we weren't told necessarily, out of our list of things to address, it didn't really seem like ban language was part of it. So we did research it, and part of the thing is that we understand is that local unit governments in Minnesota do have the power to prohibit various land uses, and to prohibit a land use that a community must have a legitimate interest in prohibiting that activity, and to articulate the reason why. And that could vary from community to community, the reasons why that doesn't fit in. So it was very, going from that perspective, it was very difficult to say, okay, here's ban language for everyone to use. But that has always existed for LGUs to explore, and they have the purview to do so. And then as here's the EQB, it was involved multiple staff from multiple agencies. The MPCA, EQB, DNR, MnDOT, Department of Health, and Department of Agriculture all helped to produce this document. It's organized by various topics. This toolbox approach was adopted. We consider it just one piece of a larger puzzle that's available. It's not the end-all for silica sand, but with the technical assistance team and with rulemaking, that parts of this will help address the silica sand issues. So there's a water, air, transportation, operations, and consideration for setbacks and buffers. I wrote the operations section with help from PCA and the Department of Health, as well as MnDOT, and assisted with the considerations for setback and buffers. If there is questions specific to air quality and water, feel free to still mention those. I don't think I'd be able to give you the technical information to answer your question, but I can definitely help facilitate you getting answers from the state and point you in the right direction. So, I'm not saying those questions are off the table, but I can, tell you where to go to get a better answer than what I can give you. So some of the things that I can talk specifically about, about operations is just considerations for lighting, hours of operation, reclamation, financial assurance, blasting requirements, and inspections. This process to create that document did rely on public participation, and the rulemaking is going to rely on public participation. It's instrumental in both processes. For that document, we did have 3 public input meetings, 2 public comment periods. We extended the second public comment period due to a request, and then we created a survey related to the various topics to LGUs. And that was very helpful in constructing this document and seeing where LGUs fall on various topics and ideas, and hopefully that is coming through in the document. Something new that we have you may be aware that there's a state silica sand webpage. And this is, the purpose of this is so that you have just one spot, or citizens, LGUs have one spot to go to try to find various agency information. They don't have to sift through all the agency web pages to try to get to information about silica sand. So this is kind of a focal point. We added information about the technical advisory, silica sand technical advisory team. There's really, what I'm seeing with how we are seeing this evolving is that there's 2 ways that the silica sand technical advisory team, I'll call it STAT for short. We've been getting a lot of informal requests where people are like, what about air monitoring? And it can be answered by one agency staff member, and we're able to put them in touch with that staff member. So that's pretty straightforward. But where the questions may be more involved, or would involve multiple agencies to wrestle, to figure out a conclusion or recommendation to. We're recommending a more formal process where a government body, formally adopts or a resolution or, requests the work to be done. And then we will try to, address whatever specific questions. The more specific the question is, the better we're able to address it and try to get recommendations for that topic. The one caveat that a lot of times I think might be intimidating people from asking requests is that in the state statute it says that if the LGUs decide not to use the recommendation, they have to justify why. And that justification might not necessarily have to be something technical. It could easily, at the state level, we're working on a technical, but there might be cultural reasons for an LGU to say, that doesn't work for us, or, so that they have to consider what we wrote, but, you're not absolutely obligated to use our recommendation. So right now, no one has formally requested the Silica Sand Technical Advisory Team. But I see once that bridge, when it's crossed, I think more people will. I think they're waiting to see how that process works out. Whoever does initiate it first, right now, has the full attention of the state agencies. So I would recommend, if anyone has any questions about whether they should do it, I would encourage them to, because this would be a very good opportunity right now. I really if I were to look into a crystal ball and say when I think people might tap on it, I think once the rules are adopted and people are implementing these legislative rules that EQB and DNR are writing, PCA, they're going to be administrating their own rules. I really see that as probably a gateway for a lot of people to want to tap onto the technical advisory team. How do you start implementing this at the local level? So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Eric to give a status update with where we are with the rulemaking and then start the dialogue.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you for having us here today. So just to give a brief update on rulemaking, there's 3 rulemakings taking place right now, PCA, DNR, and EQB for silica sand. Right now, we're currently in the information gathering stage of research and development. As Heather mentioned, we're meeting with LGUs around the state to discuss what's appropriate for DNR and EQB rules, because DNR and EQB rules are often implemented at the local level, and it's really important to get that information and feedback early in the process. So we really want to engage the local governments early and often in the rural development process. We're currently working through an advisory panel that's jointly led by the PCA and the DNR, the Silica Sand Rule Advisory Panel that meets monthly in Orinoco. And that's part of the public information gathering process as well as part of the public comment process. There's also a further public comment process for all 3 rulemakings in that once we develop draft rules, the EQB will need to present that to our board, and at that time there will be a public comment process at the EQB board, and the board will hear public comments and then adopt or change the draft rules and sonar the statement of need and reasonableness. And then once draft rules are noticed by each 3 agencies, then we move into the Administrative Procedures Act, where there's several points for public comment. But at this, what we're trying to stress now is that this early, robust input is really important and helpful in developing the real language now. So what each agency was charged with doing from the legislature was, the PCA was charged with adopting rules pertaining to the control of particulate emissions for silica sand projects. The DNR shall adopt rules pertaining to the reclamation of silica sand mines. The Department of Health shall adopt an air quality health-based value for silica sand. And the EQB shall amend its rules for environmental review and see if they should be different for different geographic areas of the state. So those are our 3 directives as far as rulemaking. So as I mentioned, we have the Silica Sand Rule Advisory Panel, which is made up of 5 representatives from LGUs, 5 representatives from industry, and 5 representatives, citizen representatives. And we wanted to take this opportunity to thank Kelly Stanich for being a citizen representative and attending all the meetings and being involved and very involved in the meetings. And we really appreciate that her involvement. The Silica Sand Rule Advisory Panel has been meeting since January, and it's all 3 rulemakings happening at the same time, which is a big task to complete to get all 3 of those rulemakings happening. So what we've been doing is, in the early months, we were working on 101s, talking about what is air permitting, what is air monitoring, talking about how the Pollution Control Agency does that. DNR talked about mine reclamation and kind of 101 basics on that, and EQB talked about what is environmental review and what's really the scope of each of those rulemakings.
And the goal of that is just, it took time. Everyone had to get on the same page and have a common language and to introduce concepts so that when we talk about this in detail, start writing rules, that we're all, we all know when we say reclamation, this is what reclamation means.
And so recently we've started to move into more of the phase where the group is discussing what they believe is appropriate for rules for each of the agencies. And that usually is more of an organic discussion that the group has to listen to each other and discuss and sometimes have conflict, but look to resolve that and come to some consensus. So that's been a really positive thing. And so what we're doing going forward is developing the draft rules and sonar language and bringing that back to the group to get feedback on that and get advice, and then move forward with that into that APA process I talked about, and a little bit different process for EQB board that we need to then, EQB board is the only agency that needs to then go to the board to ask for approval before they release draft rules, where PCA and DNR release draft rules separately. So the interim rule for the EQB, a lot of language here, but really instead of EAW, an environmental assessment worksheet must be prepared for any silica sand project that meets or exceeds the following thresholds, unless a project meets or exceeds the thresholds for EIS, or environmental impact statement, under the EQB board. Then an environmental impact statement must be prepared. So an EAW must be prepared for any silica sand project that excavates 20 or more acres of land to a mean depth of 10 feet or more during its existence. The interim rule sets the local government as the responsible government unit in that case. And 2, any silica sand project that is designed to store or capable of storing more than 7,500 tons of silica sand, or has an annual throughput of more than 200,000 tons of silica sand, is not required to receive a permit from the Pollution Control Agency. At that point, the Pollution Control Agency is the responsible government unit. And that, as Heather mentioned, that's what EQB is looking for feedback on those interim rules today, what local governments think is appropriate, what's administratively manageable. The legislature asked us to look at, should we amend those, should we change those, should they be different for different geographic areas of the state, what are appropriate rules. So as in developing rules, we have to develop a statement of need and reasonableness, or often referred to as a sonar, and that's something that we bring before an administrative law judge. Really the operative words there are need and reasonableness, what in a rule is needed and how to make it reasonable. And part of developing that sonar is to meet with local government units and stakeholders to determine what is appropriate and what is administratively feasible. So we've been meeting with LGUs, as Heather mentioned, around the state, and we'll continue to meet with them over the next several weeks and months and get their feedback. And that's really what we're here to do today, to hear your feedback and answer questions that we can answer, as Heather mentioned, and really to hear what you think about what's appropriate for environmental review. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying it. So you basically want to gather our comments and questions. You'll refer us to deeper or further people. So I think I'm going to open it up like to the staff, the study committee staff, and the commissioners for questions and comments to begin with. Anybody has questions for Eric and Heather? Dan?
Okay, Eric, your definition of the Silica Sand project, is that the definition, that's the definition you're working with, and that is the threshold, or that's the point where your rulemaking comes in?
The definition that we currently have for Silica Sand project in Chapter 114, Article 4, here, Section 91, that was given to us from the legislature, and that's the definition currently.
Is that one you have?
I don't think I put the definition up there, I put just the interim rules. So that's the interim rule.
Can you read that definition?
This definition, silica sand project means the excavation and mining and processing of silica sand, the washing, cleaning, screening, crushing, filtering, drying, sorting, stockpiling, and storing of silica sand, either at the mining site or at any other site, the hauling and transportation of silica sand, or a facility for transporting silica sand to destinations by rail, barge, truck, or other means of transportation.
Now, does all of that have to occur to be defined as a silica sand project, or what? So is that a requirement? All of that has to occur to be clearly defined as a silica sand project. And if we have one of those, then these rules apply.
I would almost say that those are the interim definitions. That is the definition for the interim rules. And I couldn't say yes or no right now, Eric, and we'd have to probably go back and talk to our environmental review person as well as or the executive director. And we can get back to you with that question. I will say that we're, for the various rulemakings, those definitions, we're working with them, we're trying to figure out what needs to be added, what needs to be clarified, and aspects or interpretations may change, and will change potentially the sonar.
Yeah, a good definition is important.
Yeah.
So I agree.
And it's something we're also working with the silica sand.
Yeah.
We haven't brought it back to them. We brought that to them at one meeting.
I think you're very close to having the correct definition. I just wanted to spell it out so everybody knew what the definition was, because everybody kind of has their own definition of what a silica sand project is. But if the state has defined it, that's what we need to go with. Which I think is good if the state does define it.
So, that's the definition of silica sand project for the environmental review. And that's what all that definition is being applied.
So now, Dan, I'm going to bring up our other question we were talking about earlier. So we were talking about this at committee this morning too. One of the things that is in the EQB document we're talking about is the definition of a bluff. Now, we obviously, you can see we're a little different here than most parts of the state. One of the questions came up with how the EQB has a bluff defined. We would consider more of a hill or a knoll in the middle of a field, and it really doesn't pertain to a lot of the big bluffs around here. And I guess kind of our question too is maybe, as far as the EQB goes, looking more at this area in helping us define what that bluff really is, because a bluff to us is different than what it is in western Minnesota or whatever. And I don't know if anybody wants to add to that or something, but that was one of the things we kind of struggled with today. Is it's like, well, okay, our definition is different than what the state's clarifying it as, but.
Because what you're defining a bluff as and that is just a knoll that's out there and that, and the fields are all over on top of this in certain areas.
I know that there's two things about the definition of bluff came from the DNR actually, and some of their bluff model ordinances. Now, I do feel comfortable in saying that if you need to modify this to address county specific, I feel like this is a flexible document to be able to address the concern. So that's one of the things that's, we're dealing with a big landscape of, along the Minnesota River Valley, along with, parts within cities where our bluffs probably just, know, are put to shame by your bluff. But yeah, what I can do is get you in contact with our Bluff land coordinator and have her, you know, help you maybe further define or give specific input for that. So,
I already made note of that. It'd be nice to have that individual come down to our study committee next and kind of help us walk through that scenario because like I said, he said our topography just varies so much here and trying to one size fits all, we're running into problems.
yep, okay, I'll forward that on.
And I think it's the same thing too, you know, with us in our areas too, even you're talking about like water tables and stuff like that too, you know, we got fairly close water tables due to where we're at, that and a lot of that stuff too comes into factor that we're a little different here than some other spots, you know.
Yeah, you're so dissected that your bluffs maybe not have the water table that, you know, your lowlands do. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
We have a lot of karst geology here, and it causes underground conduits that other counties don't have to worry about.
Yeah, no, there's a predominance
I
of
agree with
it.
Justin, we have a very unique situation down here.
Would you want someone with, you know, I know that Scott Johnson may have presented down here before about cars, but, and Jeff Green with the DNR, is that something you'd be interested in talking to as well?
We did have Jeff Green came down for a presentation early on and kind of walked actually at these public meetings, kind of walked and touched on some of the topics that we're going through here now. I guess I'd be more interested probably at this point, like I said, we'd come up at the study committee with, it's not only the top or the bluff definitions, but also we've had this morning a lengthy discussion on diesel emissions, public health, you know, and wrestling with that. And how what we're leaning to is actually trying to distinguish what is going to be what we call commercial mine and what's going to be called an industrial mine. And that's where your definition here is going to be important and how that plays in with what we're struggling to come up with. I look moving forward, you know, in the discussion when we get to diesel emissions, how that's going to have an effect on our small mines. Because, you know, let's face it, a truck going out, if it's not past about a year, we figured 2007, I think, is when the new rules of these diesel emission rules came into effect. You know, we do have a lot of small operators out there that if we go down the road of requiring, you know, the new diesel emissions and everything be met, that we could put a lot of small operators out of business. They just can't afford that type of an output right now. So that's, I mean, as we're walking through it, and I'm glad you guys, as agencies, have got technical people that probably we can draw from here on in, and I think it would be beneficial for our study committee as we go down that road of dealing with the different issues that we've got, that we have those people included in on this.
Would you, I mean, since you are like tapping multiple questions from potentially different agencies, would tapping the Silicon Sand Technical Assistance Team be helpful?
Well, I would think so.
Okay.
You know, and it's something that maybe we haven't even gotten to quite yet, you know, we're just still kind of trying to get this developed. I can't speak for everybody, but I mean, I would feel that it would be something, obviously a tool to use, and when we get stuck to tapping that resource.
Could you just go through the mechanics of involving that technical team again?
Yeah, right now, the formal request, it would just having an elected official ask the state to do it. And then after that, you know, being able to submit very specific questions would be helpful. The more specific, the better, you know, the more we'll be able to address it. And then we would try to get a return back to, I think we're saying 45 days. We would try to, you know, it's not necessarily a lengthy process, but we would address the new business problem.
we could submit written
Yeah.
questions to the team.
Yeah, and then we can also too, come down and be able to have question and answers too. You know, it's very flexible after that point, I think. And we can customize it, you know, to make sure that we get the job done.
One of the things that we've been discussing lately, including this morning, and that is existing mines, air and mostly, and sand mines, and that if, when their thing is exhausted in that, and they need to move their perimeter, and that, then they apply for, it goes under all these new rules and that. And that's going to be somewhat cost prohibitive for anybody to keep this thing going. And I kind of think that maybe keeping this existing thing in the same area instead of starting a new one, you know, how to get that done and still keep within the rules. There's been a lot of discussion.
No, that's,
I'm talking in the commercial side of this now, on the industrial side, and I understand we're gonna have different stuff.
those are all things that we're trying to get input on. And, you know, that at what thresholds do things get triggered? That's exactly the question that Eric is wrestling with. And
I see you have thresholds up there right now that you're dealing with, yeah.
Yeah, those are the interim thresholds that the legislature passed down, so I guess a good question at this point would be what would be appropriate for an existing mine? But that's the kind of feedback we're looking for today from the board.
At the county level here right now, this is not set in stone, we're just talking about this. But we're talking maybe sand mines over 55,000, I believe.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and aggregate mines over 175, is that what we're talking about? I mean, once they go over those levels in this county, we're thinking about having them go into the industrial.
Sorry, is that cubic yards or?
Cubic yards.
Okay.
Yeah, cubic yards, yeah. And so we would probably have one set of rules for the people under that threshold and another set of rules for people over that threshold.
In the silica sand, you got the environmental impacts and that. Basically, we're just kind of trying to keep what we got going on right now.
Again, we're just studying this. Yeah, this is not,
And a lot of it comes down to, too, you know, we talk a lot about our resources. We don't have, obviously, small county, we don't have the staff and stuff to do a lot of the monitoring, things that we need to. You know, our infrastructure, you know, we're a small tax base down here that we don't have the infrastructure to be doing a lot of things. So a lot of it plays into why it's like, okay, we need to maybe separate this from the commercial side and industrial and stuff. So that's what we face too, you know, obviously different than you talk Hennepin County or something like that. You know, we don't have that, you know, that revenue to you know, we got to kind of watch what the impacts are going to be.
yeah, I'll, 1 second, I see what you're raising at. Those are, that type of impact that the potential rules will have on you is exactly what we want to extract from you today.
Yep.
You know, if we say that all mines need, also the sand mines, that's the rule, also the sand mines need to do an environmental review. That's what people, you know, we're getting, you know, from all mines to no mines. And, you know, what is that magic number that would be administratively possible for you as well? So I know you've been patient, so sorry.
Well, you know, we start looking at the silica sand mines in this county, trying to agree with them, and then start looking at, you know, what that sand is. That sand's the same sand used for aggregate bedding and construction sand is done until one is processed. And what the county doesn't want to have to go out, there's monitors what every single dump truck's doing. Is it going to an agricultural site, or is it going to a construction site, or is it going out to being processed? So we kind of look more at, instead of going by the end use of the sand, but the size of the mine. So, you know, define industrial based on the size of the aggregate mines, size of sand mines, instead of the end use. Did the state look at that? There's a reason why the state went with the silica sand specifically, because I don't think our zoning office wants to follow every dump truck around to see where it's going.
No, and the direction that we're going is that, you for reclamation streams, if I can speak to. You know, a hole in the ground is a hole in the ground. Whether it's being used for, you know, silica sand for frac sand or silica sand for, you know, and for animal bedding. And so really what we want, no matter what size the mine is to have some plan that that mine gets restored into a safe and usable landscape. And so, you know, for the rule that I'm constructing, that differentiation isn't necessarily going to, you know, I don't see that differentiation occurring, but we're, you know, we're open for input. If, you know, hearing businesses what would be, you know, a hardship versus a not hardship is definitely a consideration. You know, that nothing is set in stone right now, but we're trying to get information of how, you know, this will impact.
I would echo what Heather said for the rule that I'm working on, but we're still trying to gather that information and process that and determine what is most appropriate. And I think hearing from you all, hearing from other LGUs, we're trying to put that all together and then come up with what's the most reasonable.
So you're looking at silica sand being for any acres, essentially, as long as it's considered silica sand. It's
Looking, we're looking at it from much of a broader, and I can understand why. You know, for rulemaking, I'm concerned about, you know, we're in charge of reclamation and making sure that sites get reclaimed. So it would be very hard for us to argue that this unreclaimed site is not, doesn't have a safety hazard, and this unreclaimed site does. So it really, you know, we're interested in hearing about maybe minuses for for reclamation, or I'm still open to hearing if there's exempt activities, if like someone just wants to do a small mine on their own land. Some of that stuff is on the table, but if you're looking at, you know, a 10-acre mine or a 20-acre mine, what is that impact, or what is the result of having that unreclaimed? So, you know, that is something that we are, you know, have to justify. It has to be, yeah.
See, we're differentiating between the volume, but that doesn't change everything. I mean, there's going to be a lot of similarities between the commercial and the industrial. We will require them to reclaim and all that, but just some of the requirements are going to be different if you're under 55 or over. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of things the same. Reclamation definitely, it has to be done regardless.
Yeah.
But there are some specific things that...
And there are differences with maybe some of the activities associated with end use. That's what you guys are wrestling with. And so I can understand why they're proceeding in that direction. So
And when they have a mine or something like that, and that, when does, you gotta have room to operate in it. You know, to store the stuff, you have your equipment in there, you gotta get your equipment turned around and that stuff. But when does it come into effect where to get this reclamation going? How much room does this operator need before he?
you know, we talked a little bit about this at the panel. I can understand when people want to have defined cell sizes that, right now, where I'm coming from, I understanding the process of not every mine is the same. I really feel like that has to be a negotiated thing between the LGU and the mine operator. What is a reasonable elbow room and safe elbow room for mine workers to work in, but you do want to encourage phased reclamation. So if there's a pit of the mine that's just growing weeds and they're not working in, yeah, that's a good spot to reclaim. But if you need that for your crushers, your screeners, whatever, that's an active part of the mine. So there's ways to somewhat tie this together with financial assurance, to reward, something that we're exploring that we do with iron mines is to annually look at where their footprint is, what they've reclaimed, and where they're opening up new, and to tie that into their financial assurance. So if they have a smaller footprint, well, maybe you get back some of your financial assurance. If you are really large, well, now you need to start putting in the financial assurance so that if for some reason you can't do reclamation, it can be done.
One thing we talked about this morning is now the aggregate part of it, and that they're gonna need more, you know, stockpile their different sizes and for whatever, and if they're gonna, the large corporations, there are just a couple of things like that, where they set up blacktop plants in there and they operate inside of the core. That takes a lot of room.
And that's why it's, you know, a mine plan is a unique being, it's a unique thing, so, yeah.
So a lot of things right now we're working on, we're discussing it, and, you know, with the
But your focus is aimed at the silica sand projects as defined by the state legislature, right? You're not concerned about the aggregate.
Not concerned about aggregate.
So
We're in
you're
fact
totally focused
excluded.
at the silica sand projects as defined by the state.
The legislature specifically excludes aggregate
Okay.
from
Okay.
these rules.
So you're getting hung up on that. I don't know if we need to think about that or what.
I think it probably clarifies just a little bit that you guys have totally separated the sand from
Aggregate.
from.
Yeah, and that's the legislature.
See, we're,
What
we're,
did
Yeah,
that put,
yeah.
all silica sand, frac sand,
but still, they have,
construction sand, or
Well, that's,
but they have a definition there that's very clear by the state. Yeah.
yeah. So, and then just to be clear too, is the definitions that are defined in this budget, are tied to the EQB. And so the EQB is having to follow or figure out how to work through those definitions. The DNR and PCA are not tied necessarily to those statutory definitions. It would make sense that we are all on the same page, and we're trying to get all on the same page so that, you know, one agency doesn't have a conflicting definition from each other. But, you know, there may be wiggle room too with how things get applied depending on definitions. And those are all things that we're wrestling with, that we're going to touch with the Silica Sand Panel, get their input, as well as potentially come back. You know, this isn't going to be a one and only stop for us. We're going to want to hear more as we start to develop these concepts.
Can I just ask you to explain really then what is the timelines? I mean, when do you have to have your work done and then back before the legislature? So, you know, how that impacts our work as the clock is ticking here.
As part of the legislation, we were excluded from a specific timeline. The EQB's rules do expire on July 15th, 2015. So we're just working as fast as we can to get 3 rulemakings in line to really get a lot out of the silica sand advisory panel and make sure that we can pass on the need with all the LQs. We're going slow and fast at the same time.
So, and then just to piggyback onto that, so we're working through the advisory team, but we're hoping to have something for people to comment on sometime this winter. And so we'll have draft rules to throw out there. There's a conception or perception that once the draft rules are out there, they're set in stone. They're not. This is where public involvement and public comment is very valuable. So we'll throw draft rules out there, we'll get feedback, we'll incorporate that, and the process after that might change per rule. Like if people have a lot of issues with my rule and Eric is just fine, he can go forward, where I might have to say, okay, let me think about this a little bit more, here's some more draft rules to comment on. So that it gets to a point where things will become a little bit more fluid depending on the nature of the rule, not the path that it takes. But hopefully, you know, the goal is to really keep these somewhat in step. I think there's an expectation, you know, there's a thought that these are kind of all together, even though they are 2 separate. But we're kind of trying to keep them in step with each other, and that's why we're going through the panel all at the same time. And it's, you know, probably taking a little bit longer than if it was just one rule going through the panel.
I'd say we appreciate your help.
Yeah. Is there any other questions or?
Does the board have any questions or staff? Would anybody from the public like to make some comments at this point? They're just gathering information, so.
I just want to point out to make sure you guys know that no mine in Houston County has ever been reclaimed. So we have plenty of rules that cover how that is to be done, but they all seem to have been ignored.
So there's a question, okay, what about, do you guys have anything in there, or is there any talk about, at a state level, as far as, like penalties, things like that, or are you kind of leaving it up to the LGUs?
For reclamation or?
Yeah, you know, like if somebody fails to, or say like a company comes in, doesn't reclaim it, and then walks away, and it's gonna be a $2 million reclamation plan. Like, is there any, do you guys have anything in place as far as how that all plays out? If all of a sudden you got a government agency that doesn't have that kind of money to cover it, but then the company walks away and says, oh, we're gonna be bankrupt, and you know, the whole shell, you know, is there any way to protect the local governments from doing things like that?
Yeah, I am working on the financial assurance portion, or the bond, I forgot, someone said, you don't call it financial assurance, yeah. So I'm working on that portion right now, and I'm hoping to, if I can get it through the chain of command fast enough, be able to present those pieces at our next panel meeting. And you know, the whole point of financial assurance is to be able to make sure that funds are available if a company is to, you know, for some reason go bankruptcy, and to have those easily accessible for whoever the regulatory authority is to grab at any point in time. So I'm looking at financial assurance language that pertains to iron mining and non-ferrous mining. Some of the clauses about bankruptcy and not being able, that these funds are not forfeited to bankruptcy. Some of those things, so that yes, they will be available. Will the state be involved? That's another question. And just to be, just to set expectations, our language is one line that DNR should develop reclamation rules for silica sand mines. Right now, that is the authority to give a permit to mine, to potentially have any corrective actions, or that still exists at the local level. And so, we will have guidelines for reclamation standards. We will have guidelines for financial assurance standards, and I'm interested in having guidelines for blasting standards. But some of those administrative procedures will have to still be done at the local level because we do not have the authority to dictate that. So that's the way that the legislation is set up.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But as it moves forward, when you adopt rules like, say, the DNR or PCA, or they will have enforcement if a rule is broken.
PCA does. PCA has authority over their rule, but our rule is very similar to our EQB and environmental review, where they administer the rules. However, it's being done at the local level, and the EQB isn't enforcing. That's not their role, and that won't be the role of the DNR.
The DNR or PCA, one of those agencies, if they adopt rules, will have that capability.
PCA will, DNR will not. Does that make sense? It's very much like I said, the environmental review. DNR, EQB has rules for environmental review. And it's being conducted at the local level. But, that's being, anyone can then, if for some reason those rules aren't being abided by, or even at the state level, let's say the state is an RGU and someone wants to challenge us, anyone can do it. It'll be the same way with the reclamation rules. The state a citizen could challenge, or the state could challenge just as easily through the same processes. But we do not have the legislative authority at this point to tell RGUs what to do about reclamation. We can't say, RGUs, you need to do corrective actions, or you need to have a hearing, and make those administrative procedures. We don't have the authority to dictate or enforce. It's still being enforced at the local level.
I think one of the things we were concerned about too is like air quality. How do we enforce it? I mean, can we go to the PCA and they will enforce it and set up monitors?
That's a good question, and I will have to get you in touch with the air quality folks. And,
okay.
Specifically Jeff Hedman, but how air quality is enforced, I can't answer. But
Because we can't afford to really add
put it in
staff
an
just to
department.
run around and monitor
Or
things.
And I don't think that's the model that PCA uses either. either, but they can speak better to how, how they deal with enforcement.
Okay.
Yeah.
That leads me to a question that I have for you, or the staff as well, is what do you think of the interim rule of the 20 acres or more as, with the local government as the RGU? Is that appropriate or administratively manageable?
Well, actually, that's what we were talking about today too, and we kind of came up with that 20-acre thing as well, so I guess we're probably on the same page.
We were talking 20 acres for sand,
Okay. And
but
what
we're only
about
working on the construction area right now.
administering the EAW or EIS at the local level? That's your preference as well? Or,
Well, I think with discussion, and I know it's in the ordinance now, is if we go into EAWs, we normally will charge that back, and we have the capability of going third party with that, and then charge that back to the applicant, if need be. We have done EAWs in staff already, but they are very time consuming and, yeah, they're expensive to do. So I mean, I know the last couple, we've actually went outside and had third party review on this.
I just got language from the sewer that they use for being able to charge third party, and that we'll be putting up in the ordinance library. So if you need to include something like that in your ordinance, we'll have that
You
option.
should make note of that. It's in there.
In not talking for the rest of the group, but I know myself, I know some of the other members have pushed us too. As far as an EAW for silica sand mining, 20 acres was brought up, and we had talked about even, that 200,000, having it even less than that, only because there's some impacts that will start happening sooner than that, have that review before you get to that point, So that's my only, I guess I would like to see that mark come down a little bit more, have it happen sooner, but.
and you would prefer to keep the RGU, so even though you'd be hiring a third party to do the EAW at the local level. In some instances, and other mandatory categories, the state, the DNR, PCA, or even EQB, or NDOT in some instances, is the RGU.
Well, and that's something that, in I guess, brainstorming period, people you can chime in too. I guess if that be the case, I know we don't have a lot of staff. You're looking at one half of our staff sitting right next to you. So, as far as if you had a bunch of companies come in for us to be able to do all of those reviews and be responsible for them, I think would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, but it might be a little bit overwhelming for the office, and maybe it does need to go back to the state to be, if you hit those threshold, I don't know.
Correct, yeah, it'd be way overwhelming. Not a little.
So as far as who's going to administer the EAW, yeah, I think it would be a stage, it would be better for us, only for the fact that we don't have the staff or anything like that to be able to handle it. If you had, even more than one of those requests would get to be a lot when we have other things to worry about, feedlots and, the septic stuff and the solid waste, so there's a lot of other things going on that, as far as who's going to administer it, it would be nice to have.
Do you
a
feel
different
comfortable with the discretionary process of, not discretionary, but designation process? Redesignation of being able to redesignate that as needed?
You mean in order to redesignate as far as having a different agency doing it,
The RGU.
Yeah, I guess,
Well, we've done it.
yeah.
And I think probably I'd like to keep that option. As far as we go forward.
Right.
It's, like I said, it depends on sometimes, you get right now, the workload that we've got going through, we wear multiple hats in that office. Yeah, it'd be overwhelming to do EAWs right at this point.
Right.
I think we need to redesignate
Yeah.
at times.
And it depends on, the thing is, I look at, you take a look at a large project coming in, say for instance, of what we would consider an industrial, I think state agencies could tap a lot more. If you have the expertise and you have the staffing, when we start looking at water, you start looking at air and everything,
Right.
you have the expertise in that, and I think that's where we would be.
Well, and we'd end up
We
calling those
need-
agencies anyways, so let's take out the
Right.
middleman and decide to do it,
Okay.
So it's, I think we should have that as an option.
I think we have a comment in the back.
Yes, with this 20-acre threshold, who invented that? Where did that number come from?
The legislature came up with that number and
When, how long ago?
just with the laws of
May
Minnesota.
2013.
2013. And who suggested 20 acres to the legislature?
I'm not sure.
You know, it's half of what is required for all non-metallic mines. I don't know if they just half it, or if there was
Sounds
a
great.
reason, you know, or if they just said 20 acres,
So an acre is approximately the size of a football field, correct?
70 by 70.
Huh?
70 yards by 70 yards, yeah.
That's a big footprint here in Little Houston County. I think it's too big. It's too big.
So what would be a threshold that you think is?
That's called ban, B-A-N.
We'll get to that. But as far as when the environmental review kicks in,
Yeah.
Yeah.
oh, did you have something? See?
Yeah,
Sorry, Teresa.
to me,
Sounds here.
what silica is a product, and where they ship it, you know, you don't have to follow the trucks. We're talking about volume here. To me, it's if there's a preponderance of silica, it doesn't have to be a very big amount to be a health hazard. I think that's what we have to deal with here also. You know, the air monitoring, where's that going to trigger? How much of an open area do you have to have before it becomes an air problem?
Well, then I think it's kind of what we're talking about too with volumes. You know, that you could have a 20-acre pit and take 1 truck a year out versus you could have 5 acres and take 1,000 trucks. So that's why I know the groups kind of talked about that as far as having that volume trigger, because you're right. You know, how, you know, area doesn't necessarily coincide with activity within it. Does that make sense? So I know that's kind of one of the things we've been dealing with too, and where we've come to that conclusion is it might be different. You know?
I think the amount of processing you do at the site probably creates more air problems, right? So I mean,
It depends if things are enclosed or not. If they're open air, maybe. If they're being watered, there's dust mitigation that can be implemented to help control that. So it really depends. It's hard to speak in very generalities about that.
Every site is different in this area, you know, so you got to kind of treat every site what's there.
You know, that's exactly, but there are BMPs that can be implemented to help, you know, if the issue is dust and how things are being wetted, watered, how is dust being monitored, tracked, and dealt with.
A lot of that stuff in any of this new mines or silica or whatever, that all of that stuff's got to be addressed in their pre-application plan or their operations plan before it even gets looked at.
And then there will be rules from MPCA.
Yes.
So.
Can I just ask you a question about, in your document you talk about that, or it's talked about, that there aren't any methods currently that exist to measure the amount of diesel exhaust in ambient air. And it also references that there's no direct monitoring methods or no regulatory standard. Is that being addressed since, is the MPCA looking at that? Or is there more work being done here that we just don't know?
Kelly, do you know if Jeff mentioned diesel exhaust and monitoring diesel exhaust?
You know, we talked about it.
Yeah.
And he took it down, we talked about it in the context of, you know, if you're looking at a frac sand mine that's primarily transportation is trucks, then you can't only look at the silica dust in the air, but you also have to consider the additional diesel that will be added by 200 or 300 trucks. So he was saying, yeah, we should be looking at that, but I don't know if he's going to end up putting it in the MPCA rules or not. You know, it was something that he agreed was a consideration. But, you know, I'm not sure if it's going to be addressed in the rules. And, you know, I would also just like to add, this advisory panel is just an excellent opportunity. The folks from the MPCA, the DNR, and the EQB have all been just very, very knowledgeable, very open, and while the panel certainly doesn't always agree, when you do disagree, you kind of uncover additional knowledge. And really, that's what I have seen happening on this panel. It's been an excellent approach. I feel confident we'll come up with some pretty good rules as a result of it. But the caliber of the people at the agencies is really good. And I would, I would love to see Houston County take advantage of the Silica Sand Advisory Panel. I think it would be very helpful with all the things the Houston County Frac Sand Study Committee is struggling with. They can be very, very helpful.
Well, there's something I probably don't understand about the end use debate when the silica sand is going for bedding or out to Bakken for fracking. It seems to me that if any of these rules apply in Houston County, that means that Houston County has already gone ahead and approved frac sand mining, silica sand mining. So why not just, if you have silica sand, why not just put it on a train and send it out to Bakken? Would you get more money for selling silica sand versus the same sand as Albany? I'm not sure about the price of sand for, whether it's being used for fracking or road construction. I would imagine the fracking sand is more valuable. So why would you just...
And then maybe even operator cancers, but there's just considerations as well as far as, I think, an age of bedding, it doesn't have as much capital startup as might need maybe with the silica sand, or maybe the logistics are different, trying to figure out the logistics of where you're going to actually ship your silica sand is a major consideration in developing line, I think. It's not as straightforward, the port, from what I've heard, the Port of Pomona really have capacity for shipping stuff out. So, all those play a factor of, whether you can actually start up a new frac sand line or not. And sometimes the sand, and not all silica sand is the same. There are certain, I guess, areas of formation that are more economical than other areas within the formation. And whereas the bedding, I think maybe all the formation is economical. So there's a lot of factors.
That's true.
Frac sand doesn't become frac sand until it's processed.
Yep, that's exactly. It's all silica sand until it becomes processed, and then at that point it's frac sand. But there's intermediate. I've seen operations where they'll maybe screen for quartz and then send it out to be processed for frac sand. So, yeah.
We're using around areas for culverts, a lot of dairy bedding. And the sand that's used in dairy bedding, that's very, very important for the economy of this county because that controls the quality of their milk. If they try bedding with organic things, you have much more bacteria in that, and the standards and that stuff would almost be impossible to keep the good milk.
Sure. Well, that's all the best information is helpful in constructing the rule.
See, the tonnage that goes to bedding, the percentage of that would qualify for frac sand, we probably don't know exactly, but I'm assuming it would be far less than half by the time you sort it out, because they don't sort that very much for animal bedding. They're just digging and loading them all.
But both is silica sand.
Yeah.
And both are mining silica sand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of comments did you get from, like, you were in Winona yesterday? Did they have any concerns there, not far from us, as you know, that they brought up?
I'm trying to think.
I think they were also interested in having the state agencies be
Available.
Be the RGU and be available.
As
Okay.
needed, yeah.
I think that's very important to us. Like we said, we only have half the office here now.
I think we talked further with them about, and we can talk about this as well, the administrative feasibility of measuring a storage pile or an annual throughput for, as you know, for environmental review, those sorts of things would need to be determined beforehand, before you would issue a permit for a transload or processing or mine. And so we've discussed that with LGUs about, is that administratively feasible to know that, and how would you go about knowing that?
Yeah, there's a lot of transloading conversation because of the city of Winona and what they're dealing with. So their issues were a little bit different.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
What ideas are they coming up with for measuring?
And we haven't gotten that far in the conversation.
We'd be interested when you get there, we'd be interested.
Currently for the barge, they get an annual, or not an annual, daily report on what's going through the municipal.
The port authority.
But away from the barge, like you got 200,000 tons throughput. I mean, any ideas how you would monitor that?
That's a good question for you.
We're looking for help. We're looking for help.
So here's a generic question, just maybe you guys can answer this or not, but you talk about for a mine, you have to hit an EAW if you've got 200,000 tons. Does that, you guys, or have you looked at, as far as that goes, like these transportation facilities like Winona, you hit a certain mark, are there standards, you guys have standards there too for these transportation hubs? That you hit a certain mark and things happen, or how does that work?
For transportation?
Yeah, like here's, we're talking about the mines, but then you have 10 mines all hauling into one area. Do you guys have anything as far as that goes?
I mean, I think just the interim rules, that's what we have right now, because I think the second portion there is trying to get at some of those transload and processing facilities that may be the hub and spoke. So they, the legislature set that 200,000 tons of silica, and I think that was partially to get at the, something that may be outside of a mine, off-site of a mine, a processing facility, transload facility, storage facility. That's what we're still trying to wrestle with the silica sand rule panel, as well as meeting.
And there are things too, of maybe, and this got brought up at the panel, maybe there's like a combination of things that might trigger something. And what that combination is, we're still trying to figure out, and transportation, as you know, is tricky to try to regulate. Sometimes it can be tricky and so we're trying to figure, those questions are on the table and trying to wrestle through.
Kelly?
Justin, were you just referring to density, getting guidance on density?
Well, kind of, because, like we talk about, and you're all aware too, at one point there's a whole bunch of mines being proposed and then it went to an EIS because of that whole accumulation. So do you guys have standards set for that? So say you just mentioned the barge in Winona, that is there things for these transportation hubs that if you're hauling in X amount per day or more than this, it triggers an immediate EIS or something to just look at the impacts of those communities because of it being that hub? Or
I think since each mandatory category is broken out by its specific type,
Sure.
There isn't a combined. So if it's 50,000 corn and 100,000 this and 10,000 that, and it all equals out to 500,000, there isn't a specific threshold set in EQB rule right now for something like that.
if you don't have anything set that if you're hauling in 2 million yards of silica sand that it triggers an EIS to be done or something?
Good luck here.
Okay.
It's in the interim rule, and some of the feedback that we got from Winona and the Port of Winona is that they have a set capacity, and whether it's silica sand, corn, or whatever, they're going to hit that capacity.
Right.
And so we're in the process of filtering some of this information.
Gotcha.
We just met with them yesterday.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, specifically in rule at this point, for transfer, it just looks at coal, the amount of coal coming in. It doesn't look at other commodities. For some storage, it looks at coal or liquid or hazardous materials. But it doesn't look at, as you're saying, kind of the combined throughput of barge or transload or processing facility.
Yeah. So I know we talked about all the health issues that start to come about because it's so bad. I was just thinking, geez, you're hauling these centrally located areas that, but yeah.
So you're going around for about 3 weeks or so and to all the LGUs and gathering the information, and then this information will go back to the advisory committee or?
It'll be a
next?
combination of going back to the advisory panel and helping inform the writing about the sonar, that statement of need and reasonableness. We'll
Okay.
also, in September, EQB staff will be going to the EQB board to give them an update on, similar to what we've given you today, with maybe some more detail about the panel and some of our meetings with LGUs. But we'll put that all together, and we'll try and use that as a basis for what we learn from LGUs and other stakeholders as a basis for what are some needed and reasonable rules.
Okay.
Has there been any interest by LGUs to do a ban, silica sand? Has it come up in conversation, questioned?
Not the ones that we've met with
Okay.
to date.
It's more leaning towards an ordinance, regulating it.
Yeah, to date, that's the only thing we've met with so far.
But really, our conversations are really specific to the reclamation and then environmental
Yeah.
review, which
Mhm.
both of those are trying to work with a potential proposed
Okay.
project. So
Okay.
Yeah.
it's kind of,
It still comes back to the LGU then as far as a ban.
Kelly?
Just two separate and distinct points. Number one, there are actually local government unit officials on the Silica Sand Advisory Panel that have instituted bans in 2 different local governments. So they've already actually done it. And secondly, there was a little bit of discussion about air quality monitoring. I just wanted to let folks know that the MPCA has implemented air quality monitors. And that information, they've done a really good job. They've designed and implemented an air quality monitoring architecture that takes readings every hour, sends it back to the EPA, and it's available on not the EPA, sorry, the MPCA. It's available on the MPCA website, and you can see it day by day by day, by hour. And they did that just to, say, okay, is this a practical thing to do? So they could help, implement that at any silica sand site that anyone would start up. It's not only viable, it's in operation. And that is one of those things where you typically see it charged back to the mining operator for the equipment and ongoing monitoring.
Are you talking about the one in Winona?
Yep, that's the one that the MPCA owns and operates, yep.
And the interesting thing about that is because of the wet summer, or early summer that we had, the air quality, silica particulates, seemed to be less than what was anticipated because of the moisture in the air. However, you've got to consider that we're going to have dry spells as well, so we need a longitudinal study and not jump off the roof at any point saying, this is what we have, this is what we have, either good or bad. No, we've got to let it run its course. We have to go through several periods of time to see what happens when we have an extended drying period of time in the year.
For particulate monitoring, yeah, the EPA generally recommends a 3-year study. But with regard to actual silica sand mining, it may make sense to have fence line monitoring at all times the mine is in operation. Those are some of the sorts of things that we talk about in the rulemaking advisory group.
Further comments or input to the staff here?
Thanks for coming down.
Thank you for
Thanks for
having us.
having us.
Thank you, yes, that's been very, very informative, and you'll keep us updated.
Will do, yeah, we look forward to coming back with
Sounds good.
progress.
All right. And Rick's got a lot of the contact information as far as what we might need for our study groups.
Yeah. I'll talk to you.
Sure.
All right, thank
you
you.
very much.
So, I'll send
Before we leave, Ron, when did you want the board, when did you want to get going on that tour?
And then, maybe checks.
If we have one break for lunch,
Sure.
and as soon as we can gather, we can go.
Okay.
Sounds good, I'd go for that.
Yeah, I'd like to go to this later.
Huh? Brian, somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
Sure, so moved.
There you go.